You can hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Good evening to all of you. Uh, now, uh, who is your class representative? Raisa Chatterjee.
Yes, sir.
Okay, how many students are there in this class?
The 66.
66. So we can see 61 people in.
Sir, 66 and uh, a number of students have been
Oh, yeah,
joined
the
by lateral.
lateral.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
How
sir.
many? How many?
So 16
Sir,
students in lateral.
No,
No,
16 will is not for your class. This is A plus B, right? Your is section A.
9 numbers of.
9. So 66 plus 9, it will become 75. Is that correct?
yes, sir.
Okay, so now I can see 61 people. Okay. Okay, then I think we have enough students, so we can start. But Aja, have I taken any class by any chance earlier? Because I was not in Jadavpur. Uh, you people, any class by any
Yes,
chance?
sir. Yes, sir.
Yes,
I
sir.
What?
IEEE class.
Ah, that one. Okay, IEEE class, that one. All right. Anyway, then you have already, I mean, I have met you in some form or other. Anyway, then I start the class, and once again, I request and particularly CRUs circulate a message among yourselves that generally I try to join the class always on time, and I expect my students to also join on time. I am very little bothered about your, attendance and others. What I want is, if you are interested in my class, then you join. Otherwise, please don't join. I don't mind that if you don't join my class. And in that respect, every day I will give maximum 5 minutes time to join my class. After that, I will not allow you to join my class. Today, I will give you 10 minutes. So whoever comes within 5:10 p.m., I will allow. Otherwise, I will not allow. And henceforth, you have to remember that. And the second thing is that I am, involved in many committees at the national level and others. So often, I have to attend national meetings. Now, if that is the case, I have already fixed your classes. You know that the timing I have given. I will try to maintain that time, but if due to some reason or other I am not available, I will inform you and we'll arrange alternative timing, whichever is best suited. Fine. Now I come to the topic of this particular course. You know that this is a course on field theory, and typically our course is divided into two parts. One part will talk about the electrostatic fields, the other part will talk about the electromagnetic fields. My part is on electrostatic field, and another faculty will take care of the electromagnetic field part. There is no need of taking any notes, etc., because whatever I will teach, you will get the entire note in soft copy in PDF format. So please don't bother about taking the notes. On the contrary, you try to interact in the class. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask, and that will be much more helpful. So with this, now I start my class, but before that, let me share my file. Okay, so is it coming on your screen?
Yes, sir.
Any PDF file you can see?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good.
Yes, sir.
Fine. So no problem in that. This PDF file you will get the full this thing. And very interestingly, I was looking at the when I started. I think Sharnodip has put as his, what you call it, this profile photo of Feynman, right? Is it correct, Shranadip?
Yes, yes, sir.
Yes. And look at my file. The first line, I am starting this course quoting Richard Feynman. So it's a sort of coincidence. And we all know that Feynman, one of the legendary physicists, so he said once that observation, reason, and experiment make up what we call the scientific method. Now, this is a very interesting statement, right? He has stated about three things, right? Observation, then reason, and of course, finally, the experiment. That makes up what we call the scientific method. And I very strongly believe about this observation. And I believe that an engineer, if he or she doesn't have good observation power, then in all probability in your professional life, you will not be successful. That I take it from me. I am in engineering profession for 35 years plus, and this is my firm belief after all those years of experience. In fact, in real life, the professional life, many things will not be told to you. Like in a university or a college, you can go to the teacher, you can go to the laboratory technician, you can ask questions. But in practical life, there will be hardly anybody who will come and tell you that you do this, you do that. Many things, in fact, majority of the things you have to observe and learn, and of course, you have to do some reasoning. This is absolutely true for our life. In fact, I ask you a question. Can you tell me that here, I mean, seeing and observing are the same? I repeat, seeing and observing are the same. Any
No,
idea?
sir. No,
No.
sir.
No, sir.
No, sir.
Then what is the difference?
So seeing means just looking at something and not realizing what it is, and observing means looking at it, understanding it,
Good. I mean,
trying.
good. I give you an example, and I am putting a question to you, all of you. And this is a test I do when I do classroom teaching. Now, online, probably I cannot do it, but just I'm asking you a question. Think about it. Wherever you are sitting, I mean, don't look upwards. Probably in your room, there is a ceiling fan. Is it there, ceiling fan?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think all of them probably you are having a ceiling fan in your room. My question is very simple. Within 3 seconds, can you tell me which direction it rotates, clockwise or anti-clockwise?
Anti-clockwise.
Anti-clockwise.
See, now since you are not in my classroom, so I cannot check what you are doing. But in my class, I have checked 50% people say clockwise, 50% people say anti-clockwise. Now there are only two options, so it is very straightforward to say. But now here is that answer between observation and seeing. See, when I look at the ceiling fan, I just see it. But when I observe, then I really observe that it is rotating in this direction, like that. See, this is one of the simplest example of that seeing and observing. And this is what an engineer has to do. Observe. And then look, after the observation, try to reason. And you will see that your, I would not say knowledge, but your overall spread of your subject depth, etc., will increase immensely. So this is how I start this course. And this is field theory. So a question that often people ask me, that fine, this is field theory, so many things we are discussing, but has anybody seen field? The answer is no. But what does it matter, you know? For example, that many things, for example, electric field, we don't see, but there are effects that we can see. And after observing those effects, then we can reason and come to a decision. And that is how exactly entire field theory is established. Because nobody has seen the field, but it has, I mean, people have observed effects. I will show you one video just to show, or rather highlight my point. Let me find out that file. Yeah, here. Okay, so I will show you a video. You know, all of you must have seen these switches, but those are mostly the low voltage switches. So when those switches open or close, practically it doesn't happen. Nothing happens. Very small amount of, you know, you might see a small spark of that. What I'm going to show you is a high voltage switch, a 500 kV, 500 kilovolt kV switch is opening. And this switch is carrying current. But as I have told you, nobody has seen current also. So this switch is carrying current, which I have not seen. But the moment switch opens, I can see the effect. That's the point that I want to make. That field also is similar. I don't see the field, but I can see the effect. So just see it. Oh, I have to share. Hopefully now it will come on your screen. Is it coming on your screen? Videos is coming?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. Now see, this is an high voltage substation. You can clearly make out. And it is an outdoor substation. You can see this one. Look at my mouse on the screen. This is the switch. And there are 3 switches for 3 phases. You see here, 1, 2, 3. So red phase, yellow phase, blue phase. And this one is actually the switch where the mouse is rotating now. This is called a double pole switch. You can see this is one pole, this is another pole. Now it is closed, so current is flowing. Now it is opening, so the right pole will rotate in the clockwise direction, left pole will rotate in the anti-clockwise direction, and it will open. Now I cannot see current, but the moment it opens, I can see the effect. So I will show you the effect. And this is a 500 kV line opening. I repeat to show you. So now you see, this is what happens, right? I have not seen the current. In fact, nobody has seen. But the moment the switch opens, I know that there was a current, and this is exactly what is happening. And you must have seen the arc that has happened. And this photo was taken far from away because it's a high voltage line. So the height of the arc is phenomenal. And that is because of the what is called the breaking of the current, which we cannot see. But the effect of breaking of current we can see. So with this, again, I come back to my PDF file. Now, even in the 17th century, that means 1600 something, it was known that matters exert force on each other. And it was also known that they were very inversely with the distance between them. It was known. And it is called the long-range interaction. Long-range interaction because the distance between the matter is high, very large. And we all know that commonly we call it gravitation. Then the question comes that when the two matters come very close to each other, what is the nature of interaction? It is called short-range interaction. Is it gravitation? The answer is no. At that dimension, the gravitation is very weak. That will show you. I will try to show you. Now, observation shows that I have already said that earlier. The observation is important. That observation shows that at the short range, this force or the interaction is analogous to gravitational force. That means it varies inversely with the distance. But there was a big difference that was observed at the short range compared to the long range. Now, what is the difference? The difference is that in gravitation, any one matter attracts the other matter. But that's not the case in the short range interaction. In short range interaction, we have both. Here, a matter can attract another matter or it can repel another matter. So, what causes this short range interaction must be different from what causes gravitation. This was first observed from the differences. And from that, the first concept of the electric charge came. That there must be something which is a basic property of matter carried by its elementary particles. And we are talking of a time when the atomic structure, etc., was not known. This came much later on when the atomic structure was known. Then we understood that this positive charge, then protons, negative charge, the nuclear, electrons, etc., etc., all those things were known. And naturally, later on, experimentation has been done. So people have observed, then people have done its reasoning. And then, of course, when enough experimental facility was there, people did the experimentation. And it was clearly found that the electrons and the protons, they have the same amount of negative and the positive charge. So, what was done later on is that the charge that exists in this world is actually now quantized by units equal to the charge of electron or proton, which becomes a fundamental physical constant. That E is the amount of charge that an electron or a proton carries. You all know that. Of course, there are particles called quarks, which does not have this E amount of charge, but it has E by 3 or its integer multiples like that. And what is the charge in an electron or a proton? You all know. And then came the later on SI system of units, where the charge unit of charge is coulomb. And coulomb is nothing but a very big number, as you can see on the screen, 6.24 and etc. into 10 to the power 18 natural units of electric charge. So therefore, conversely, we make it that what is the charge of an electron and what is the charge of an proton. Now, here there is one thing just passingly I have to measure, that electric charge is conservative in nature. Now, what does it mean? It means that in any isolated system or in any sort of reaction, chemical reaction, etc., the net electric charge remains constant. This is a very basic property. The algebraic sum of the elementary charges remains the same. So in physical terms, then what does it imply? It implies that if a net negative charge appears in one part of an isolated system, then it must be accompanied by the appearance of an equal amount of positive charge in another part of the system. So in modern atomic theory, now it has been proved that fundamental particles of matter, they continuously and spontaneously appear, disappear, change into one another, but they obey one constraint, that the net quantity of charge is preserved. Now, there are many important ramifications of this property. I will try to explain in brief. But before that, there is one small thing again, that electric field. Now, it is something like this, that everything is observation and reasoning. So, let's say I have a charge present in space. And we have said that charges, they have a short range interaction. So if a charge is present in space, then if another charge comes into that space, naturally it will experience a force. Now I can rephrase the statement, that which means that the effect of this source charge is spread over the space. And this is called the field. That means if I have, again I repeat, a source charge is there and another charge comes into that space, and it will experience a force, which means that the effect of the source charge is spread over the space. And that effect is nothing but the electric field, which is caused by the source charge. So now again, if I change my statement, so if I ask that if there is one particular thing which is absent in space, then there will be no electric field. The answer is charge. That means if there is no charge, there will be no electric field. These are the very interesting questions often asked in interviews. To just see that whether you have understood electrical engineering properly or not. Now, if we want to understand the behavior of an electric field by a conventional way, so what we do, we consider that there is a test charge, which will be a unit positive charge. And then what does it experience when it comes into the field of another charge? So the case is something like this, that let's say in the left figure, I have a net positive charge at a particular location in space. So its effect is spread over this space. And now if a unit positive charge comes into its field, naturally it will experience a repulsive force. So it will move away from the source charge. And therefore, this trajectory which this test charge will follow, we will call it electric field lines or electric flux lines. If it is a negative charge, then this unit positive charge will be attracted towards it. And therefore, I can now rephrase my statement that if there is a positive charge and there is a negative charge, then the electric field lines will always be coming out of the positive charge, and then it will terminate on the negative charge. Because if there is a unit positive charge, which is the test charge, it will naturally experience a repulsive force from the positive source charge. So it will move away, but it will experience an attractive force with respect to the negative source charge. So it will go towards the negative source charge. So electric field lines, therefore, in general, they come out of the positive charge and go into the negative charge. With that, we come to the first fundamental law of electric field, and that is Coulomb's law. And we have to understand the brilliance of such physicist. In this case, the French physicist, Charles Augustin de Coulomb. His work on electrostatic interaction between electrically charged particles was published in 1785. Just look at the year, 1785. And you know, at that point of time, he determined the magnitude of the electric force between 2 point charges using a torsion balance. I mean, this just shows the innovativeness of people. Now, what is important in this case is that this interaction is a non-contact force, just like gravitation. Gravitation is a non-contact force. This short-range interaction or electrostatic force is also a non-contact force and acts over certain distance of separation. So, when there are two charges and a separation distance, so there are three critical variables, two charges and a separation distance, then there is an electrostatic interaction, and this force can be computed following the Coulomb's law. And you all know Coulomb's law, that the magnitude of the force is proportional to the scalar multiplication of the magnitude of the point charges and inversely proportional to the square of the separation distance between the point charges. And the electrostatic force of interaction acts along the straight line joining the 2 point charges. As stated earlier, if the 2 point charges are of same polarity, it will be repulsive in nature. If they are of opposite polarity, they are attractive in nature. But here, one thing generally we overlook, that there are two conditions to be fulfilled for Coulomb's law to be valid. What are these two conditions? The first condition is that the charges involved must be point charges. Coulomb's law is valid for point charge. And second, the most important, the charges must be stationary with respect to each other. This is something which we don't state when we ask. I often ask, state Coulomb's law. Now, typically people say this proportional, this and that, but people never say the stationary aspect. Then I say that you are still in that school level. You have not really learned the Coulomb's law in its details. Then you have the Coulomb's law as equation 1.1 on your screen. I will not go into that. You know it much better than me. What I would try to explain is slightly different. That is called Coulomb's constant. In the Coulomb's law, you can see here, see, the force is Q1, Q2, then denominator is R square. Then there is something called 1 by 4 pi epsilon 0, where epsilon 0 is permittivity of free space. So, this 1 by 4 pi epsilon 0 is taken as a constant. And if you put the value of pi, if you put the value of epsilon 0, it comes as 9 into 10 to the power 9. Unit is Newton meter square by Coulomb square. With this, we can do a small comparison between electrostatic and gravitational forces. That means short range force and long range force. What is the comparison between them? Now I can write the equation 1.3. Left side is electrostatic force, where K is Coulomb constant. Right side is Newton's law, where G is the gravitational constant. And you all know what are the values of K and what is the value of G. That you know already. From your school level, you are aware of that. Now, what you can see here is that looking at these two constants, which one is higher? See, Coulomb's constant is 10 to the power plus 9, Whereas the gravitational constant, the universal gravitational constant, is 10 to the power minus 11. So Coulomb constant is much, much higher compared to the gravitational constant. So therefore, just think about it, that if I take two charges of 1 Coulomb, I am talking about SI system, 1 Coulomb, they are separated by a distance of 1 meter. What is the force between them? It becomes 9 into 10 to the power 9 Newton. If I take two masses of 1 kg, distance between them is 1 meter. What is the force between them? It is 6.67 into 10 to the power minus 11 Newton. So you see here I have two charges which are the fundamental unit of SI system. 1 Coulomb, distance is 1 meter, here it is 1 kg, 1 meter. Then we can see that the short range force is enormously larger than the long range force. But then another comparison we can do. What is that? It is something like this, that consider that these two masses are electrons. So we know what is the charge of the two electrons. We know what is the mass of the two electrons. So using the two equations, that means here, equation 1.3, I can put here the Q1, Q2 as charge of electrons, R 1 meter. Here I can put the mass of two electrons, R 1 meter. G and K is known, so I can find out electrostatic force and gravitational force. If I take the ratio, electrostatic force divided by the gravitational force, it's a fantastic ratio of 10 to the power plus 42. That means two electrons, when they are separated by a distance of 1 meter, the electrostatic force acting between them and the gravitational force acting between them, there is a difference of 10 to the power plus 42. That means the short range force is too high compared to the gravitational forces at that range. So then it is a logical question with this, that then our universe must be governed by the electrostatic forces. Why at all we are considering the gravitational forces? Yeah, there is a paradox here. Now we can explain it in this way. The key to the understanding of this is that in gravitational force, we have only the attractive forces, whereas in the electrostatic force, we have either positive or negative polarity charges. And there is nothing called a negative mass, but we have negative charge. So gravitational forces are always cumulative, but electrical forces can cancel each other. Just for an argument, I am giving you an argument that consider that our universe at the very beginning, and it starts with a randomly distributed electric charge. And it is quite expected that these electric forces are too dominant over the gravity. So, because of these dominant electrostatic forces, the positive charges, they experience repulsive force and they try to go as far away from the other positive charges, and they try to get as close as possible to the negative charges. Now, typically in physics, you will, at the basic level of physics, we say that a positive charge and negative charge will come close and cancel each other. Now, this is a very crude statement. When I say that they cancel each other, what really happens? Right? So when I say they come close to each other, how close they come to each other? These questions have been now found out, answers to these questions through quantum mechanics. So it is not that one charge comes and falls on the other charge. It never happens like that. But when they come very close, say for example 10 to the power minus 10 meters, 0.1 nanometer, things become completely different. That's why, today we all talk about nanotechnology, because at that level, nano level, the entire interaction gets changed. So when they come to that level, then they make a sort of pair, and their effect on large scale gets mutually cancelled each other. That means if you take two charges which are separated by 10 to the power minus 10 meter, and if you take another charge which is say 10 meter from this pair, and if you take the electrostatic force on that third charge because of this pair of charge which are one positive and one negative, then that third charge will experience almost zero force. That means effectively the field of the positive charge has been cancelled out by the field of the negative charge at a larger length scale. So it is something like this, that because of the dominant electrostatic forces, the same polarity charges, they go far away, whereas opposite polarity charges come together, make a pair, and when they come very close to each other, they are now a pair of two opposite polarity charges, and then the effect of these two charges at a larger distance cancel each other. And therefore, effectively, at larger distances, gravitation becomes the dominant force. Whereas the moment you come to the nano level and others, then this short-term interaction is the main force. Now, another important aspect is that, as I already told, that the electric charge is a conserved quantity. That's why I said that it's not like that one charge falls on the other and they cancel each other. No, that doesn't happen, because then charges will be, disappearing. That doesn't happen. Charges remains conserved, and the net charge of the universe, many physicists, they propose that it can neither increase or decrease. And in fact, so far, no elementary particle reaction has been discovered that creates or destroys charge. Now, therefore, a question comes that what will be the effect of departure from electrical neutrality? Electrical neutrality means that in our short range, when these charges make a pair, then their effect is nullified at larger lengths. This is called the electrical neutrality. Now, particularly, this electric field is there on the atomic scale, which is termed as quantum electromagnetism. Whereas this course is on classical electromagnetism. That means electromagnetism at a larger scale of length, much larger compared to atomic scale. So what we will discuss is classical electromagnetism. And this classical electromagnetism of nanometer length. On the contrary, we consider that at a larger scale, typically the system is electrically neutral. But if due to some reason or other, this neutrality is disturbed, what is the effect? At the macroscopic level, that is called the classical electromagnetism. Yes, please remember that when we talk about this deviation for neutrality, it's not a major deviation. It cannot be. Because if there is a major deviation, then there will be gigantic forces that will be generated, which will destroy this entire system, our known physical system. So it's a small deviation that itself can create havoc. So it is something like this. Let me explain. Although this is a theoretical concept, not a practical concept. As you can see here, that on the left, I have a copper sphere, two copper spheres, radius is 0.62 centimeter. Their volume is 1 cc, and they are touching each other. So now the explanation is something like this, that they are good electrical conductors, we all know. This is copper. So we all know that it has one valence electron in its outermost shell. That is also known. And we also know that this outer shell electron in copper is free to move in the volume of this material. So with this, the density of metallic copper is approximately 9 gram per cc. And 1 mole of copper is 63.55 grams. These are known values. So 1 cc of copper contains approximately how many copper atoms, if we calculate? Approximately, not exact. It is quite high. And if we take, this is actually 8.5 into 10 to the power 22, as you can see from the calculation. Now, 1 valence electron per atom, and electron charge is 1.6 into 10 to the power minus 19 coulombs. And then if we take how many valence how many copper atoms in this 1 cc of copper, so there are about 13,600 coulombs of potentially mobile charge within 1 cc of copper. It is potentially mobile charge is there. Now it is something like that we are saying that we are extracting a few electrons, the valence electrons from the copper spheres. The moment we do, then there is a deviation from neutrality, because if I extract a few positive electrons, then there will be some positive charges remaining, net positive charge. The moment it will happen, these positive charges, because of the repulsive force, they will try to move away, and ultimately they will reside at the two extreme ends where the distance is largest. Now you can always ask that why it cannot go outside. Reason is very simple. Outside is air, and air is electrical insulation, so the charges cannot move freely through an electrical insulation. So these free charges will appear at the two extremities, as you can see in the right side. But now these are free charges, the net free charges. The question is that, is it possible that because of this net free charges, there will be a repulsive force, and then the two copper spheres will have a force between them? And if this force is more than the weight of this, then there will be a separation distance that will come between them. That if we try to calculate, it will be something like this, that there are total 13,600 coulombs of potentially mobile charge. And again, the question is, how much electron we need to remove so that there is enough net positive charge to suspend the top sphere over the bottom. So the force required to lift the top sphere of copper against the gravity would be its weight, which is quite clear. Now that 1 cc of copper, we can calculate this force. That means this gravitational force is 0.0883 Newton. So we have to generate this force. The radius of a sphere we have said is 0.62 centimeter. So the repulsive force to be considered should be between 2 point charges of 2.48, right? So diameter is 0.62 into 2, then the distance is 2 into the diameter. So it is 2.48 centimeter apart. That is twice the diameter. So from Coulomb's law, this weight equal to the Coulomb's law, then Q. So Q comes out to be equation 1.5. 7.75 into 10 to the power minus 8 coulomb. That means this much of charge, if we can take out through electrons from this system, then the rest positive charge, they will have a repulsive force which will overcome the gravitational force of this sphere, that copper sphere. And I have already said that there are total 13,600 coulomb of charge. Out of that, we are taking out 7.75 into 10 to the power minus 8 coulomb. So you can see that I was trying to tell you that the deviation from electrical neutrality is required is very small, which can have a major effect on the system. So I can rephrase my statement that removing just one valence electron out of every 175 billion copper atoms from each sphere, that will be enough to suspend the gravitational pull of the entire Earth on that copper sphere. Now just think of it, that just taking out one valence electron out of 175 billion copper atoms from one sphere. If I take it out, then the force that will be created will be enough to overcome the entire gravitation of Earth on this copper sphere. That's fantastic, isn't it? So what I wanted to mean here is that the deviation from electrical neutrality required is very small. So whatever we are seeing, the effect of electric field, actually is a small deviation from the electrical neutrality. If there is a major deviation, there will be fantastic amount of force generated. So now we just say that force due to a system of discrete charges. Although discrete charges are hard to find in physical system, but still for theoretical analysis, we'll say that there are a number of charges, Q1 through Qn. And then if I have another charge, that is unit positive charge, which is a test charge, then what is the force acting on that due to this system of discrete charges? It is very simple. It comes directly from the Coulomb's law. So unit positive charge multiplied by the source charges, then sum up the whole thing. So this becomes equation 1.6. So it is something like this, that Q1, Q2, etc. These are the source charges. And then this small q is the test charge. These are the respective distance vectors. So if these are all known, then I can always find out what is the force on this q, small q, which means that the field created by this entire system of discrete charges we can compute. But then this type of discrete charges are hardly present in our system. What we always get is a continuous charge distribution, because our system, the natural system, is a continuous system. Discrete systems are actually man-made. The natural system is continuous. Even though it is, we feel like it is a discrete, but actually it is not discrete. That lightning, it is not discrete. Lightning can also be shown that it has its definite rise time and definite fall time. So it is a continuous system. So what we can say is that we have to assume a charge distribution in the space. Now this charge distribution for our field theory analysis, that we have to analyze, or in other words, let me tell you like this, that if I consider the charge in a wire, so what I say that I know the charge distribution, and it is linear charge distribution, that x coulomb per meter, that is defined as lambda r prime. And then I take an infinitesimal line element, that is dl prime at the position of r prime. Then this charge density, lambda r prime, multiplied by the length element dl prime, that becomes a small charge, which is equivalent to a point charge of Coulomb's law. And then I can use this formula of Coulomb's law. If it is a surface charge distribution, let's say I have a disk Or if I have a sphere, the charge is distributed over the surface. So then I will consider the surface charge density, sigma r prime. R prime is always the charge density at one location. Now, why you can always say that why are you putting r prime? The answer is very simple, because we don't know whether the charge distribution is same everywhere. That means if it is same everywhere, then we call it uniform charge distribution. If it is different at different location, we call it non-uniform charge distribution. For all practical reasons, it is better to assume non-uniform charge distribution, because that is what happens in real life. So if it is surface charge distribution, I will consider surface charge density. We'll take an infinitesimal area element at a position r prime. Then we'll multiply the surface charge density with the infinitesimal area element. Then that will again become dq of Coulomb's law. Then we can again use this formula. If it is a volume charge distribution, that is charge in the volume of a material, we'll take volume charge density. We'll take an infinitesimal volume element and then multiply these two, and then again we'll get dq of the Coulomb's law. And once we get that, then the effect on a test charge q will be not like this summation of that, but it's an integration, because it's a continuous charge distribution. So just one small element dq, that will have a force of, this small q is the test charge. So q into dq by 4 pi epsilon 0, then Coulomb's law. And then we straight away integrate over the, if it is a line, we integrate over the line. If it is a surface, we integrate over the surface. That means dq is integrated over the line or over the surface or over the volume. And then we get what is the net force due to the continuous charge distribution. So therefore, with this concept, this is the last topic for today. So what we are talking about is a force because of the presence of charges. So it is always better that we define a vector quantity. We call it vector field. And what is this? We are saying that it is the force exerted on a unit test charge of positive polarity located at a particular position. So therefore, force is the test charge q multiplied by ur. Where is ur? Er is the force experienced by unit charge. So multiplied by q, which is the test charge magnitude, maybe it will become the net force. So we can always write this in terms of either discrete charge configuration or continuous charge configuration. In both ways, it is possible to write. So if my source charge is a single charge q at a given local position, then this ER will become q. You know, the Coulomb's law says q1, q2, but in this case it will be just q. In this case it will be just q because the other one is unit charge. So q by 4 pi epsilon 0 r square into unit vector, because the other charge is unit charge. So that is q1 is q, q2 is 1, distance is r. So q1 is q into 1 divided by 4 pi epsilon r square into unit vector. And its unit is Newton per Coulomb. However, we don't use this unit in practice. The practical unit is different, so we'll discuss it in a later section. But please remember, then the electric field intensity, this vector quantity, then how have we defined? It is the force experienced by a unit positive charge in the presence of a source charge. That is called the electric field intensity. So with this, I will stop today. This is the first class. Then gradually I will go forward. But again, I repeat that in this entire class, you will see that, see, generally field theory, whenever we say, the people have an idea of lot of equations and vector calculus, del operator, this, that, etc. But my view is that we should discuss it in a reverse way. That means there is something as an observation that something has happened. It is physically happening. Then we will explain that with the help of mathematics. That happening is because of the field. We are explaining it using mathematics. It is not that the mathematics comes first and the effect is second. No, it's the reverse. The effect was there. I have observed it. And then I'm doing my reasoning with the help of certain mathematics. So in this entire field theory discussion, what I will do in this class, I will always first try to say that this is the physical quantity. That means here you can see this is a force experienced by a charge. This can be measured. Force can be measured. And then we are trying to write the equation from the Coulomb's law. So this will be the approach I will take. And why? Because I feel that in real life, if there is something which you cannot measure, then it is useless. This you will learn later on in your life, that anything or everything, what you are discussing, if you cannot measure it, then it has no value. Then it is everything abstract. So in field theory also, whatever we will discuss, we'll try to show that we can measure it. Measure it means with the help of real experimental or instrumentation, I can measure it. Then only we can say that whatever we are doing, that Feynman said, that observation, reasoning followed by experimentation. So with this, I stop here. And as I said, this note will be given to you. So don't bother about the note taking. If you have any questions here, I think you can feel free. Anybody has anything in your mind?
So we have to follow any reference book for field theory?
See, there are a lot of reference books. You can follow any one. I don't mind. But whatever I am going to give you, first follow that. If you find anything extra, then you follow. There are so many good books. You can follow anyone. I am not against any book. But only one thing is that the treatment of field theory is not same in all the books. So whichever you feel comfortable, follow that book. Anybody else? Okay, I think if you are okay, then today we will